Someone shared this with me, and this is we talked about my old ideologies just kind of converging in all these different spaces. It's in gaming, it's in knitting, it's at big social companies, it's in your city council meetings, it's at your kids' elementary school, it is in churches. And so this is something that a lot of Christians, so-called Christians, are now sharing. And this is my old ideology seeping into the church, subverting the gospel.
I don't mean to interrupt. What you just said totally reminded me of the scene in The Matrix where he's like, you feel it when you pay your taxes, when you go to the school, when you it's everywhere. I totally felt like you were Morpheus just for a moment, and I wanted to give you some worship for being Morpheus.
It's all around you, and you know there's something wrong with it, but it sounds good, and you can't quite put your finger on it.
Yes, it's everywhere.
Well, first of all, this might help. First of all, look at the title here. This woman, there's something creepy about the title. Why I stopped talking about racial reconciliation and started talking about white supremacy. It's like she's selling white supremacy.
It does seem like that.
Doesn't it sound like? It's like, you guys, racial reconciliation is a thing of the past. Let's start preaching white supremacy, guys.
And it does. By the way, that title could totally be used for like a KKK recruitment article.
Yes. Actually, when somebody first said this to me, I thought I without knowing what it was, I saw the title and I thought this was going to be, oh great, this is someone who's moved over into white supremacy now. Ugh, right? But that just goes to show you how similar, we've talked about before, my old ideology, social justice ideology and white supremacy have so much in common. They're both collectivists, they're both racist, completely racist. And they both say the best way to look at the world is as a competition between identity groups, race being one of those groups, and to treat people and judge them differently on the basis of race and not treat them as individuals. It has so much in common with white supremacy. So I just wanted to read a couple things from this because this is it's disgusting. But I think you have to look at some of this stuff and be aware that it's moving in so that you can confront it when it moves into, if you're not in a church, when it moves into your workplace or in your kid's school. But the fact that it's moved into the church is one of the most awful, I think, because if you can take something that is itself a religion and a belief system and a way of looking at the world, and you can infect it with this other belief system, that's really
it is an infection. Yeah, totally. Infection.
It's more that it's different when it infects a school, right? There's not necessarily one system of belief in a public school. I mean, there kind of is, statism,
I don't know.
maybe.
I think it's worse when it affects a school, right? I mean...
But, I mean, it's not subverting a dominant system of belief. This shows how powerful it is.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You don't like it because it's... Yeah, but, I mean, it subverts everything. So any institution with a system of belief, it subverts that. Yeah, totally.
Right. I'm not saying
Didn't it ruin... So I've been an atheist for a while, but, like, I got out of the idea of having to argue with people about atheism a long time ago. So I wasn't around for the new atheist movement that I think like James Lindsay and a lot of those people were around for. Didn't it like destroy them as well? Didn't they all fracture
as well? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm not saying this is worse. Just let me be clear. I'm saying this when it destroys another system of belief, that shows you its true power. It's not moving into a vacuum. There's not a vacuum here where, hey, there's no system of belief here. This thing moves in and becomes a system of belief. It's moving into a place where there is a system of belief and it's squashing it and replacing it.
Yep.
That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and the scary thing is it did that in Christianity and it did it without Christianity and atheism. Like it does it everywhere. I would actually argue it probably even did it to Marxism.
It did.
Right? Like did it to Marxism.
It killed Marxism.
Yeah, it's done it everywhere. It's like the HIV of ideas. It like goes and takes over the T cells and yeah.
Yeah, and it makes everything work for it. Everything gets converted into little zombies that work for it. So this person, I just want to, first of all, this is poorly written, but let's hear about this person's background. Beginning with the not guilty verdict of George Zimmerman and gaining momentum with the murder of Michael Brown in the fall of 2014, Black Lives Matter revealed the limits of the racial reconciliation model espoused by many evangelical organizations in the 90s. I watched as white Christians and people of color submitted to whiteness. Okay, now they never define what whiteness is, and
Michael
they have
Brown wasn't murdered. I just want to point that out. Like,
right,
Michael Brown was not murdered.
but let's just to get to this point.
Sorry,
Submitted to whiteness. What does
Okay.
that mean? Ask them to define whiteness because they can't. And I think getting into little, I totally hear you, Carter. But if this were a person who sent you this, a friend who sent you this, which is the case of someone who sent
I
it to
know
me,
it's a non-essential point. I know
it's not an essential point because you're going to get in the weeds on Michael Brown, and they're not going to listen to anything else you have to say because you're telling them that something they believe to be fact is not true. So don't even go there. Just ask them what is whiteness.
Yep.
That would be nice. My
No, I agree. I think that's probably the smartest strategy because ask. In fact, I told that advice to someone recently. Like, ask them to define terms that sound weird to you because, like, usually they can't. So
yeah.
And if they do define whiteness, it'll be very evident that they're a white supremacist. By the way.
Yeah, and if when they define whiteness, ask them, is that also the way that white supremacists would define whiteness? Because their definition is very similar to. They're like, whiteness is the system of well, this is a little bit different than white supremacy. They say it's a system of oppression, but they say, what is whiteness? Well, it's the idea of like using reason and logic, and the idea that people should be on time to things, and the idea, the belief in meritocracy and of hard work and individualism.
Right.
So
those don't. Believing that those are whiteness, that doesn't perpetuate any negative black stereotypes.
Right. So here we go. So she says, I watched as white Christians and people of color submitted to whiteness. Okay, what does that mean? Responded again and again with denial of systemic injustice. Okay, well, first of all, if they're denying systemic injustice, the burden is on you to define what systemic injustice you're talking about. And again, they can never truly define it. Ask them to define it, because I guarantee you 9 times out of 10, they don't know what they're actually talking about. And when you ask them to define systemic racism or systemic injustice, they will give you individual examples. So they say they're arguing on this big collectivist systemic level, but then when they provide examples, it's a very individual, anecdotal. I know this friend that this happened to them. Okay, that's like that's an individualist level,
right? And when they do try and appeal to like actual stats, what they will do is they'll appeal to outcome differences. And the question to ask them then is like, well, how do you know that's what it's due to? Like, right? How do you know? Right? Oh, black people are disproportionately in prison. Okay, well, why? How do you know? Have you looked up any of the stats? How do you know that it's racism that's causing that, right? Black people are in the NBA. Does that mean it's racist? No. Like, they're disproportionately in the NBA and in prison. Like, why is systemic racism automatically the answer in one case, but not at all the answer in the other case? Right?
Yeah.
They can't.
They can't. Disregard for the lived experience of black people. Now, this is a word, they love this phrase, lived experience. There is no lived experience of black people as a group. There's no one experience. There's no one black experience, just like there's no one white experience. It is a lie. What they're trying to tell you is, we've talked about this before, but they are trying to pretend like this belief system is the voice of black people. And this belief system is the lived experience of that the lived experience of black people culminates in this belief system. No, it doesn't. They do not speak for black people. They don't speak for any group. This doesn't speak for any group. And they will go after and demonize and target for harassment and for mockery any black person who speaks against this belief system. That's why they hate anyone who talks against it, especially when they're people of color. But they don't speak the lived experience. There is no lived experience of black people. Ask them.
There's lived experience of a black person.
Right.
That's what there is.
Do you believe? I would say, do you believe that all black people have the same lived experience and that they all have the same opinions and they all speak with the same voice? Do you think white supremacists believe that all black people have the same experience and have the same opinions and speak with the same voice? Do you look at an individual Black person primarily as an individual, or do you look at them as a group? Do you look at them and say Black people? Do you think white supremacists look at a Black person as an individual, or as a member of a group, like Black people? Right. They are collectivists. You have to kind of show them that they're collectivists sometimes, because it's crazy. They speak collectivism, but it's almost like they're in denial of what they're speaking. I'm not going to read the whole thing because I know we have to go soon, but I want to scroll down to well, here's one. But before I go down further, silence in the pulpit. They don't mean silence in the pulpit. There's no preacher who's standing at a pulpit and not speaking. What they mean by silence is what they mean when they say silence is violence, which is also a lie. They mean if you are not speaking this ideology, then we're going to say that you're silent, which is a lie. And we're going to say your silence is violence, which is a lie. But that's what they mean, silence in the pulpit. No, they mean non-compliance in the pulpit. Non-compliance with this belief system in the pulpit. That's the problem. That's what she sees as the problem. Preachers who are not speaking this woke cult bullshit.
Yep.
Deeply ingrained superiority regarding issues of race. Where? Define it. Again, you're saying things that are really weighty and heavy. These are heavy accusations. Where is it? If you can't point it out, how are people supposed to root it out?
Is it that they don't expect Black people to show up on time? Oh, wait, no, that's right. That was your side.
That's what they believe, right?
Right, yeah.
They're superior. They have superiority beliefs. Anyway, fixation on intentions over outcomes. Hey, guess what? This is something else. They always attack. They like to attack intent and say intent doesn't matter. It's only what I perceive matters. So Carter, if you said or did something to me and I'm like, that was deeply sexist, Carter, it's because I'm a woman. And if you said, oh, that's not how I intended at all, here, let me explain what I meant. All I have to say as an SJW is your intent doesn't matter, Carter. I perceived it as sexist, therefore it is sexist. No, That's not how reality works. Intentions do matter. And outcomes.
Yeah, I just want to also say, like, outcomes, they are the ones fixated on outcomes, right? Yeah. What they're conflating, because you actually don't even have to talk about intentions. Right. My argument that there isn't a systemic racism embedded everywhere has nothing to do with intent. I'm not saying that there aren't, I don't have to make an argument about intent.
Right.
Likewise, you can't make an argument that outcomes are different, therefore systemic racism. You have to look for causes beyond. You can look for causes beyond either one of those. Right. Intent isn't necessary. There are differences between how people behave. I don't know why. You could research that too, but that's like extra taboo to have that discussion, right? But there are differences. People are behaving in different ways. So that's why the outcomes are different. And you don't have to examine intent behind that. There's no intent discussion that's necessary. You can just look at the language, right? There's no racially codified language treating people differently.
Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah. Sorry, you want to read more of this? Or?
No, great point. Yeah, I just want to point out how throughout this article, she does reveal something very important. She attacks individualism repeatedly in this piece. She calls individualism toxic. She calls it not parasitic. There's another word she used that's just pathological here. Pathological individualism. So this tells you, again, what we said, this ideology is a collectivist ideology. It doesn't view people as individuals. It views people as groups, just like white supremacy. It's the same coin, different side of that collectivist coin. But so this paragraph here, she says, I had to ask why those discipled by the racial reconciliation framework were so ill-equipped to, now she says, engage, learn from, and respond to a movement focused on systemic and institutionalized racial injustice. What she means is, why were these people not becoming indoctrinated fast enough into my cult and speaking my cult beliefs from the pulpit? Why were they not getting indoctrinated fast enough, and why were they not speaking this indoctrination?
It's like a cancer saying, hey, why is the immune system working? There's something wrong.
Watch the immune system with. You're great. That's great. Yeah. I'll discuss 3 reasons. Now, this is a person saying, this is like a cult member saying 3 reasons why our cult beliefs are not taking hold fast enough. 1, individualistic theology. That's her number 1 enemy, individualism.
That is a good reason why the idea isn't taking hold.
Yeah.
That's
She's
true.
right.
Yeah.
She's right. She's right, because guess what? Individualism is the antidote to collectivism. And so she has to try and destroy individualism. That's what they do. They try and destroy it.
And by the way, I tweeted this out the other day because of this, not this article, but like,
yeah,
I realized that, like, you know what actual anti-racism is?
What?
Individualism.
Well, duh, yeah.
Individualism is anti-racism is individualism. Like, that's what that is. Actual anti-racism is called individualism. That's what it's called.
Period.
You don't make up a new word called anti-racism. It already exists. It's called individualism. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But when they say anti-racism, they mean racism. That's what they call their racism. They have to give their racism a new word. Anti-racism. It's racism. So she says, so here are the enemies. In her opinion, here's a cult member unintentionally revealing the what she views as what the barriers to her cult progressing further. Individualism. She says a sanitized version of history. Well, actually, here's the thing about history. I think this is projection, Carter. What do you think? Because they think they know a lot about history, but they don't.
Yeah, I don't know that I would say it's a sanitized version of history. I mean, I think here's the thing. I would take that argument with more weight if she was advocating, which I'm sure she's not, if she was advocating for a very complete, balanced, historical approach. So, for example, maybe you would talk about the first slaves coming in 1619, but you would also talk about how the founding of America on the principles upon which it was founded. And when you talked about abolitionism, you would talk about how the abolitionists cited the Declaration of Independence more than the Constitution, but they cited the founding documents. You would talk about individualism being what made America unique. Like, you would have this discussion, and in the context of like, and here are some things that maybe don't get talked about because history is written often by the people. I won't say history is not written by the winners. I don't think that's true. History is written by the intellectuals who survive. That's who it's written by, right? So I would say that in the 20th century, the history was mostly written by Marxist intellectuals because they're who survived. Like, it's mostly Howard Zinn and like people like it's not that. So I don't think that she means what she says. What she means by that is that because you can tell from how they treat history generally, we only focus on all burdens being like all sin is part of white culture and Christian culture, and we don't talk about, like, when she says a more complete version of history, do we say, oh, so we're going to talk about how the tribes that were in North America were cannibalistic and murdering each other? A lot of them were. Some of them were peaceful. We're going to talk about the abhorrent behavior of a lot of the Native Americans. No. And we're going to talk about that it was actual Africans who sold other Africans into slavery. And actually slavery had been going on in Africa for quite some time. Like, are we going to talk about that in the context of the evils of slavery in America as well? No, right? So
no, because they have to make what they call whiteness, but they really mean white people. They have to make that the villain. They can't talk about
and again, because humanity. She's a white supremacist.
Yeah,
she's focused. Yeah. She's like obsessed with white culture. They are obsessed with white culture. It's weird how obsessed they are. Everything she wants a history that's all about how evil white culture is. That's it.
So they just like white supremacists, they ascribe a whole bunch of stuff to white people and white culture that is wrongly ascribed to white people and white culture. They try to say all these things belong to, this is just white culture is about this. Like both like the bad things that have happened in history and the good things. They try and say like, the values of the Enlightenment. Oh, that's all white culture, you know,
right.
And slavery. That's all white culture. No, you're looking at things with a racial lens, guess what? You're going to see everything with a racial lens because those are the glasses you're wearing. Take those glasses off and try and be objective.
So anyway, the first one I agree with. The second one and third one I think she's bullshitting on, but that's
good old white centering. Ask her to define that, right?
Yeah.
So this part here, I'm about to get at it. I'm not going to read the whole thing. The whole thing is massively. It's just a bunch of. It is revolting, especially for someone who claims to be a believer in Christ. This is revolting what she's doing. This, in my opinion, is what the Bible talks about when it says taking the Lord's name in vain. You are using God to spew something that is a perversion of Christianity, and that is one of the worst things you can do. It's evil. So here she says, the term racial reconciliation serves the dominant culture. Guess what? The dominant culture is your belief system now. It's your ideology. It serves white people and those who align with whiteness. The term I like that she has a little out there for any person of color who doesn't speak her evil ideology. Well, those are people of color who align with whiteness.
Right.
The term reconciliation is relational in nature, and though relationships are important, the focus on relationships is anchored in white theology's pathological individualism. Jesus died for my sins. Jesus went to the cross for me. I know the plans he has for me. So here she goes on to attack individualism and to try and do it by using Jesus. It is one of the most revolting things I've ever seen. You guys should read this, especially if you're a Christian, read this so you know what's moving into the churches. It's a site called Inheritance Magazine, and it's by Erna Kim Hackett. It is about an 8-minute read, they say. But just read through this and notice how many times she attacks individualism. That's my little rant.
Look, this is the thing. They know their enemies, right? They know. And they know, like, ideologically, they know individualism is the enemy. They know that. They know Western culture is the enemy. They know that.
Yeah.
This isn't. They know who they're going after.